Hey guys, thank you very much for joining us for week 1 of Young Saints. It's an utter pleasure to be doing this teaching with you. I can't wait to see what we're going to learn over the next 4 weeks. It's going to be fantastic. So this week we are looking at fishes and loaves. So you probably know the story of Jesus who fed the 5,000 with the loaves and the fishes from the little boy. And the thing we want to focus on today is the fact that you are not too young to be used by God. We're going to look at a couple of scriptures today. We're going to look at 1 Timothy, which is going to be our verse for the series, as it were, as well as John and Isaiah. So, have you ever felt incredibly unqualified to do something? So, when I was younger, I worked at an alpaca farm. So for those of you who don't know, alpacas are very similar to llamas and camels. They're from the camelid family. See, I'm very geeky on this. And alpacas are really well known for their wool. Pardon me. They're really well known for their wool. So you can sort of make jumpers out of their wool. You can make socks. You can make all sorts of stuff. So this one day, I went to what is called a gun and game fair with my ex-boyfriend. And while I was there was a woman who had come to show off her alpacas. There was about 4 of them. They were beautiful. Oh, I fell in love. And she said to me, why don't you come along and, come visit the farm? So I was like, oh, yes, definitely. That'd be awesome. And so I sort of dragged my mum along because I don't drive. My mum drove me to this farm and we went to see these alpacas. And I was just sort of looking around and having a lot of fun. And my mum was talking to the lady, and suddenly my mum was like, oh, hey, I got you a job. You now work on an alpaca farm. I've never done animal husbandry in my life. The closest thing to taking care of a pet was a guinea pig I had when I was like 10. I had, what do you do with alpacas? It's an alpaca. So suddenly I was having to brush and feed and clean up the poo of alpacas. And I felt so out of my depth. I had no idea what I was going to do. So have you ever felt unqualified to do something? What was that like? We can often feel unqualified in our walk with God. We often might not know what we're doing or how to handle things. We might feel too young or too inexperienced to be able to handle what God is throwing at us. Do you ever feel spiritually unqualified? God might be calling you to do something that is way out of your comfort zone or level of expertise. And it's easy to get discouraged and to feel powerless. But I believe that the scripture that we're going to look at is there to encourage you to be more than you ever thought you were capable of. So let's take a look at Timothy. Timothy was he was with Paul, who was an apostle. He travelled around the known world with Paul. And Paul writes to Timothy. So in 1 Timothy 4:12, Paul says to him, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity." Quite simply, Paul is saying to Timothy, don't think any less of yourself simply because you're young. So now we have a huge block of text here, and I'll read it out for you. It's the story of the 2 loaves and 5 fishes from John. It's also known as the feeding of the 5,000. Now, this was one of the key miracles that Jesus performed, and it's one that pretty much everyone sort of learns about in Sunday school. So let's take a look. It says, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing those who were ill. Then Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, who was one of his disciples, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked him this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages, that is, 200 pieces of silver, to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will that go among so many?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there, so even more women and children. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." So one young boy and his lunch was the key player in one of the most well-known miracles that Jesus ever performed. Many of us fall into the trap of focusing on our age. We ask, how can God use someone like me? But Scripture shows us that God is less interested in our outward appearance. He is looking for a heart of obedience. When the young boy brought what he had, Jesus used it miraculously. He wasn't concerned, like the disciples, with the amount of food that he had. He simply gave Jesus all that he had, and Jesus did the rest. When we shift our focus from our limitations to God's ability, he uses us in ways we could never have imagined. The bottom line, guys, is that you are not too young to be used by God. If you take one thing away from this video, it is that you are not too young to be used by God, no matter what your age. So how can we shift our limitations to God's ability? Guys, think about that for a while. So let's take a look at Isaiah. Isaiah 6:8 says, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?' And I said, 'Here I am, send me.'" Have you reached a place of willingness to obey God no matter where he might send you? That might look different for all of us. That might look like going on a mission trip to South Sudan, or it might look like going up to the young kid who's being bullied and having a conversation with him. It looks different for everyone, but be willing to obey God no matter where he might send you. So how can we apply this to our lives? We might often let fear, discouragement, intimidation, or a dozen other things keep us from being willing and available to go where God sends us. Our next step is to simply etch these words into our daily prayer life. Here I am, Lord, send me. When we daily surrender in prayer to wherever God is calling us, we make ourselves ready and available, just like the young boy with his lunch. When you become ready, Jesus begins to do miracles. Be available for God to send you. So think about how you can become practically available to God this week. Be it opening your heart, opening your ears, opening your mind. How can you become available? So how can we respond? Stand boldly in faith. Don't be discouraged or intimidated by your youth, but empowered to be available and ready for God to use you. We're going to pray. All us leaders, all us youth, we're going to pray this week and declare in our lives that here I am, Lord, send me. So if you have anything that you want to bring in prayer, bring it now. Do you have issues at home? Is there stuff going on at school? Is there something that you're worried about? Bring it to prayer. Message me, email me, drop me a line, and me and my team will pray for you. But as you pray, I want you to say out loud, here I am, Lord, send me.